Get ready before life happens. The podcast helping you navigate life's what ifs.
Many families, and especially women, are feeling squeezed from every direction. Caregiving, work, rising costs, and money conversations that never happen. Welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens. I'm pleased to be joined today by Jacqui Clarke. Jacqui, welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens.
Oh, hey, Tony, it's great to be here with you. I'm enjoying the opportunity to collaborate with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. You're doing some cool work. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story and how did it lead you to focus on communication?
Look, that's a great question. It's a pretty loaded one too, actually. Look, when I think of my life, I began, like anybody does, I was around the kitchen table at home with a family business. Where I realized very early on that communication around things like money was kind of important. And throughout my career, interestingly, I started to realize that things like just getting good results wasn't as important as being able to communicate clearly with people. And I think that's probably an area that I've enjoyed so much in my career, actually. But if you think about that journey working with, I've spent my career basically working with wealthy families and senior executives. One of the things that struck me was how often people don't open up and share their money stories with you. And I think we can all learn so much. You know, my life, I'm a mum in a blended family of 5 kids. I've been married for the second time now for almost 20 years. So I've been through a horrific divorce. I recently lost both my parents, relatively close together, completely unexpected. So like quite significant life changes that I think can also have an impact on you and bring this whole communication piece right to the forefront. You know, it's a lot of what gets unsaid can be the most difficult or damaging things in families and in family relationships. So I think for me, there's been a thread right through life around open communication. And where I see that most effectively used is in conversations about money and finances. And where I've seen it very poorly done is with money and finances. So when people just simply don't want to talk about it.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like that's a whistle stop roundabout way of talking about why I think communication with money is so critical, actually.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to go back to what you said is not communicating and opening up really can have some harmful effects. And I think that's oftentimes, especially in legacy planning, that's a huge thing.
You're absolutely right, because there's a lot of barriers I think that people put up, and often that comes from, again, I talk about your money story, like where you started out and perhaps the types of conversations that you did or didn't have. You know, when I was growing up, it was rude to talk about money or what people earned. And I don't think that that shifted so much, but perhaps what's more real today is with the increase in the cost of living, it's more difficult for the next generation to get into housing. Then you need to have a conversation about how, well, A, you might be able to help them. But I think if I had the knowledge I have today, it would have been a little bit different for me in my 20s when it came to buying a house and things like that. So, you know, you'd like to be able to share that information if you can with the other generations. But I do also see in families, and certainly where there's a lot of wealth, where there's a lot of secrets about money, and it's, you know, it's kind of a closed book. And the worst thing about that is that usually people find out all the answers when somebody dies, and usually not the easiest way.
Yeah, and without the context, I think that's the other thing, and that's a project that I'm working on now is to help people provide that context when they're creating, what I'm calling a financial readiness plan, because the documents are great, but I know you know, trying to prepare my final stuff for my family is like, okay, the will and trust say what is going to happen, but they don't say why. And I think the
No,
why is so important.
yes, and I think we have a lot of wills contested. I think in the US and in Australia, it's similar now. So other generations coming through are more readily able to contest wills now. And if you're not really clear on your wishes, then it is open to interpretation, and people can, if there's an old loan that's not documented in a family, that all these things come up to the surface, and can cause or wreak havoc and actually freeze assets, which is the worst thing that can happen. Having just been through both my parents passing, and I was their executor, so I was very close to their financial affairs, which is not normal, obviously, for most people. But that was quite complicated. I have a great relationship with my sister, so we were able to navigate things quite easily, but it's still complicated, getting into somebody else's affairs. But also, now I still wish that my parents were alive and say, why did you do that? Those questions about why did something exist the way it did. There's often not a paper trail that explains it. So the more conversations I think you can have in that regard, the better. But perhaps the only mistake people make, Tony, is they also think that they're invincible. And we don't start
Mm.
talking about things like it. I know we've sort of gone straight to the end. People don't start talking about estate or will planning until they're in their 80s or somebody gets sick. And the reality is people die all the time. And I find a lot of people aren't or don't have plans in place, appropriate plans for their estate, which they need to get onto now.
Yeah, and that's the worst thing that I've encountered. Well, one, I'm sorry to hear about your parents, of course. That's
Thanks,
always
Tony.
very
Yes,
hard.
it's pretty hard. Yeah.
But the people don't plan, and widows. I think the average age of widows in the U.S. is around 50, somewhere around there. It was a lot younger than I expected it to be.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so when you think about that, is that's huge. And it's a lot of people think, well, I'll do my, like you said, I'll do my estate planning later, or they don't update it when they have their kids, or they don't update it, uh, when their kids reach age 18 or whatever.
Mm. Well, and people avoid it because there are hard decisions that you need to make when you're doing estate planning. But I think what we know as practitioners is that the absence of a will makes things much worse. So if there are things in your will that are difficult to decide on, make a call. Ask somebody professionally to help you make a decision so that you get the document done rather than not having one at all. And you just touched on something talking about the average age of widows in the US, and I spend a lot of time, not unlike you, on my financial literacy, you know, footstool, because I continually meet with widows and people approaching divorce. I'm just about to write on Substack about the grey divorce, which is a phenomenon that's increasing quite substantially in around the world, actually. And I think that's largely a function of levels of financial independence increasing, but not necessarily financial literacy. And so people come to me when either somebody's died or they're thinking of separating, and they really don't know where assets are held, who owns what the incomes are, what the costs are. Even that's even the scarier part, is people aren't actually aware of what their outgoings are from their house. So you sort of get ground zero in those situations. Nothing worse than if somebody dies, like a spouse, and you don't know where to start. Because I think that the difficult part is when you're grieving, you're not necessarily thinking clearly. And if you're under pressure to make decisions, some financial ones, like, for example, funding a funeral, um, and you don't even know where to access cash from, that's just the start of how complex it can be. And again, if you're navigating those conversations with siblings or other parents, whoever it might be, it's a lot to take on.
Definitely, definitely. Well, and you bring me to one of the things that we were going to talk about, um, is about the importance for wives or the non-money partner to really
Mm.
have, knowledge of money. Why do you think it's so important? Why do you recommend that?
Oh, look, probably through experience, Tony, I've seen, fortunately or unfortunately, and it might also be because I'm a female advisor in the space, that people come to me probably feeling like that they'll get some empathy too, that I feel for them when they come to me saying, this has happened, I need your help, but I basically don't know where to start. And look, I think what happens, there's some really obvious things that impact why particularly women, but not always women, are a bit in the cold on finances. And I think quite simply, as you get older, you might get married, you might have children, You might step out of the workforce briefly for a while, having children. All these things cause so much mental load that invariably in relationships, somebody takes on the financial management, somebody takes on other duties. And it seems for some reason, if the person that's typically at work, which has been historically the male, and the woman who is typically at home raising the children, the breadwinner, old-fashioned term, tends to be responsible for the money stuff. And so the spouse or partner at home is the one who's taking care of the home, and not necessarily all the finances. And what happens is over time, and this is where this financial literacy gap begins, is when they step out of the workforce from their full-time jobs to have children, they start their financial literacy. It's like the connectedness to anything financial beyond the groceries and other administrative costs at home. They're the things that you might know. I mean, I work with a lot of older men who don't know the price of bread and milk. That's a different conversation. But that's not the financial literacy we're talking about. But actually slowly letting go of paying the bills, knowing where the credit card information is, knowing simple things like who owns the assets, what structures you've got. And sometimes I guess it becomes a lot of noise as well, and people let that go. So I'm on that other side of the receiving end where people are going through something, some type of challenge or misadventure that happens in life, and they come to me and we have to start right from the beginning to work things out, to create a paper trail of where assets or investments are, understanding what their cost of living is so they know what their future costs might be and what they need. And again, I'm saying in the context of the partner's dying or somebody's become very sick, or they're going through a separation.
Yeah,
But
and
I do think it's the mental load and how much can you take on. And it seems like the financial stuff is the thing that gets dropped or passed on.
And my belief on that is just because people don't want to talk about and deal with money anyway. So it's much easier to let go of the things that you don't want to talk about or deal with that anyway. So how can
Yes.
women and couples start to make that shift where money becomes something they actually want to talk about?
Yeah. Well, look, I often get people come to me and say, look, my partner's not interested. How do I get them interested? And I say, well, don't they want to do a renovation on the house, don't they? Or they'd like to move homes or change suburbs, or they'd like to go on a holiday. And I think a nice way of engaging people first is looking at financial goal setting. Don't call it financial goal setting, call it life goal setting. That's something that might appeal to people, but trying to identify as a couple what are the goals that you might like to set. And I find that's a nice way of engaging, because you look out, like call it your North Star. It might be renovating a home, it might be buying a bigger home, depending on the stage of life that you're at. And then the opportunity lies in, well, what are the steps it takes to get there? Now, naturally, underpinning that will be financial steps. And it might be how you structure your work. It might be, I focus a lot, and certainly in my book, Stop Worrying About Money, my first sort of third of the book is focused on things like recognizing your open the front door costs. So I talk about encouraging people to actually understand what it costs to run their home. A lot of people don't know that and don't review it regularly. And I am a firm believer that makes a huge difference, because until you're aware of those outgoings, it's also hard to recognize what you might be able to save. And that takes you then to those financial goals that you've set, to recognizing what money can be set aside weekly or monthly to contribute to those goals. And I think that's a nice way of engaging both partners. It's a bit like, you decide as a family that you want to get a big new screen TV and it's $8,000, pick a number. And the money's not in the bank. You could use a credit card. That's one option. But how quickly can you pay that credit card off? And the next option is, well, these are the things I'm going to do to get us to that new TV faster. Now, we're not really good at waiting anymore, which is why the credit card is so easy to use. But there's an opportunity as a couple to make a decision about what's changing in the household outgoings to get you to buying that TV or whatever it might be sooner.
Yeah, I love that. There isn't really a difference between a life goal and a money goal.
Mm.
anyway,
We're
is like,
just concealing it.
yeah,
A
well,
cover up.
yeah, it's like, maybe putting a little cheese sauce on your broccoli or something, but,
Yeah, why
you
not? Well, actually, I always joke, that dish, chili con carne, a
oh yeah.
globally renowned dish. And we have one son who's never been a veggie man. So you know what I do? I make the chili con carne and I put everything I can find in the refrigerator, right into the chili con carne. And we still all have chili con carne. We still have the cheese and the corn chips, but there's a lot of veggies jammed in that thing. So
Well,
yes,
you do what you got to do. And,
yeah,
if you don't want to talk about something, is you can address it from a different way. But,
yeah,
as you mentioned, if you're thinking about, let's say, retirement,
mm,
is it's a financial goal and it's a life goal. It's like, where do you want to live? Maybe temperature, environment, or,
yes.
whatever. But it's also like, well, what are we going to be able to afford? And so it's like
Oh
they
yeah.
do go hand in hand.
Yeah, and look, that's a real hot button right now, probably for my age group. But seeing that transition to retirement conversations start to evolve, and a lot of the conversations I'm having are like this, essentially based on that cost of living you've established. You won't be able to retire anytime in the next 30 years. What can we do about that? Or how do we adjust those financial goals? So your horizon to retirement, so when that might be, and what are the savings you require to get you there? So it's really interesting because people, I think, work. There's this treadmill effect of environment that people work in and the income that they're used to having. So they right size their lifestyles up to that income level, and then you're trapped. There's not really a way out of that. And then somebody says, "Oh, when are you going to retire?" It's like, hang on a minute. I can't do that. And the reality is, I think the way the job market works and business works is that you do tend to wind down in your 70s a little bit. Gone are the days of 60 or 65 in retirement. But even semi-retirement or part-time, whatever the shift is going to be, it does require quite significant cash flow planning. And again, like the financial goals or life goals, if the goal is, well, I don't want to be full time working when I'm 75, okay, what are you going to change today to enable that? And I think it comes down largely to what are the outgoings of the lifestyle you've currently set up for yourself and what needs to shift in that regard. And until we in a relationship are prepared to have that conversation, we can't make any change.
Exactly. And
And the scary thing is you get to retirement and it's hell, hell.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I think one thing you did say, the one word I didn't hear you say was budget. And I think
Mm.
that's important to note is because, we say some of these words, like if you told your son you were putting a lot of vegetables in the chili con carne,
We need it.
he
He
would not
probably
be
would need it.
interested in it. But he's still going to eat it and not ask too many questions because it tastes good.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
what
so
he,
true.
and that's the thing when we talk about money is if there's words that are a turnoff to us, like budgeting and all these other things where, it causes anxiety, is just don't,
Yeah.
reframe the conversation as you're talking about.
Yeah. And look, you've just touched on something that is important to me and acknowledging that I think money made me anxious. And that's why I wrote the book, Stop Worrying About Money. But when my parents would joke that I had saved from the first dollar I earned until I got divorced. And I became quite anxious about money because I think when you go through a divorce, like I did in my late 30s, early 40s, that the world, the floor gets taken out from underneath you financially. You've built this nice amount of wealth up, and then for one reason or another, it can pretty quickly disappear going through a divorce with a couple of young children. And it made me really anxious. So I think the steps that were required to take to address feeling anxious about money was the planning and it was the budgeting and it was the cash flow management and taking a good hard look at the lifestyle I had, what the lifestyle was I wanted to lead, and what steps I need to take to make that have a more enduring or longer lasting plan around it so that it was manageable.
Definitely. Yeah, I was just reflecting so much on what you were saying.
Yeah. There's like all these
I
triggers. Lots of
well,
triggers.
and I think that's the big thing is a lot of people don't, to get back to what we were talking about is talking about money. A lot of people don't talk about money just because they feel anxiety. You bring up money, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'd rather talk about almost anything else in the world
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
talk about money." So, what do you say to somebody saying, I mean, because that is your book, but what's like that big tip from your book is like, I come to you, Jacqui, I'm completely freak out every time I think about money. What would you say to me?
I'd say that that's normal, but we can ease that anxiety by having more information and communicating. If you have a partner, communicating about money can be really empowering in a relationship, but also for that anxiety. And recognizing what steps you can take to preserve and protect your wealth in your lifetime. And that can be everything from, the types of insurances you have if you need them, recognizing what will happen to your family if something happens to you, what are the arrangements if you get sick. So actually digging into the detail a bit more is, I think, what eats away at the anxiety. And so for me, that information is power. Like with communication, how important that can be. It just reduces the barriers for people around money. And look, I find that it does not serve people to put their head in the sand. I talk about the three biggest money mistakes. One of those is wearing and driving your money. The second one is essentially putting your head in the sand, which a lot of people, and particularly women, do. And the third one is not knowing what your baseline costs are to run your house. So they're the three I talk about often. And I find when people are able to address it, the anxiety just peels off. And actually knowing what it costs most people would say, I don't want to know what it costs. Like, I'm scared. And the reality is that's fine. But when this shitstorm happens down the track, when you die, your partner gets sick, these things, there's a lot of grief for people to deal with one way or the other. How can you reduce that as well? So it's sort of preparedness around the future and things going wrong, because things invariably do.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I changed the name of the show to Get Ready Before Life Happens.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Is that preparation. But I love what you say about having more information is,
Yeah.
that's, what I hope that people take away from the show is that they're
Yeah.
encouraged to ask more questions. And the more curious you are, the more
Yes.
information you get. And then the more in control that you are
Yes.
because you do have that information, you have that level of comfort.
And you just mentioned something there. One of the things I also come across is people, the reluctance also leads to having advisors that they don't necessarily have a strong connection or rapport with. So, say, for example, your college mate was your accountant and you've got a great relationship with him, but then your partner didn't really like him, back in the day and hasn't, but knows that everything's under control. That's pretty common. I like to say to people, do you have an advisor that you have strong rapport with? Like, who's in that personal finance village for you, not for your family, for you? Somebody that you can talk to, that you can trust, that you feel gives you support when you've got emotional things around money to talk about or think about, somebody who can guide you. And that can be something that people miss. And often I see it, people come to me when things have gone wrong because they've had an advisor where things haven't worked out and they're in the dark and really unsure what to do next. And so it's about building relationships with advisors for themselves, not relying on someone else. Plus, I find, and because I do a lot of work in the tax space as well, is that some tax advisors don't have deep technical skills in a particular area. There's no point in sticking it with them and hopefully, muddying your way through it. Actually find somebody who's an expert in that area that can actually give you advice. But if you're sticking with, Tony's accountant because Tony's known him for 30 years or whatever, that might not be serving you very well. So, finding people that can support you with your needs is really important, and not relying on the family accountant, the family advisor. If they feel right for you, great. But if they don't, get that person in your team.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point. And we can see that in the stats, at least in the United
Yes.
States, is
Yeah.
80 to 90% of widows will leave their current financial planner. And of course,
Mhm.
divorcees, the numbers
Yeah.
are about the same. And
And
it's
yeah.
exactly what you
It,
talk about.
Yeah, and I just see it on the other side, which is that again, reluctance to change, but realizing that something's not working. But that fear of not having the information, maybe not feeling comfortable asking the certain types of questions as well. You've got to find somebody that you have great rapport in, that you can text or call and get an answer that you feel's got your back. You need that person. And if you don't have them, go find them.
Definitely, definitely. And for
Yeah.
advisors, again, you've heard this on the show a lot. Be sure to talk to both spouses. When you
Yeah.
have those spouses
Oh,
in there, have a conversation and a
oh,
connection with
yeah.
both.
Yes, I'll tell you a funny story. Not that long ago, probably 3 months ago, I was contacted by a journalist who was writing an article for the Australian and New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants, and it was about what can advisors do in respect of spouses, like what's their role. And I said, well, one of the things I have seen throughout my career, having predominantly male clients, is that the men come to the meeting and don't bring their spouses. And I'm saying now, like I think as an advisor, you have a responsibility to make sure that the spouse is there. Or what do you need to do to meet with the spouse as well? Because it sort of goes down you might meet them once, and then typically the husband continues to maintain that relationship and deal with all the financial stuff. But my shout out to advisors is with your client, the one that you've got the strong relationship with, ask them about the partner and can we have the partner come to the meetings or can I go and meet with the partner separately just to make sure that they're up to date with whether it's the investment portfolio, the choice, why we're choosing certain things. But just trying to build that bridge between the spouse. I mean, it's fair. You can't be the same things to all people. So it makes sense that the spouse might need somebody else, but you could also offer someone in your organization, a peer, if you're not the right person. But the first step is let's get them in the room. And I think
Well,
that's upon
and they're both your
advice.
client.
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
sorry, a little bit of a delay there. And they're both your clients.
Yes.
The
I
wife
know.
in this case
Mhm.
is also a client, and you should know your client. So it's a pretty basic rule. So before we
Yeah.
start to wrap up, I want to make sure we talk about the planet squeeze.
Oh,
Is
yes.
why are so many families, especially women, feeling squeezed right now?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thanks for asking, Tony. I kind of named this Planet Squeeze recently after experiencing so many family and friends going through the experience where their parents were aging. And there's a couple of really obvious statistics that make all this make sense, but it's not until you get all the information you go, now I get it. But with aging parents and a lot of neurodegenerative diseases around now, like dementia and Alzheimer's, and also younger kids staying at home because of cost of living and other pressures. We've got people getting married about 7 to 9 years later than they did in the 70s, people having babies about 6 to 7 years later than they did in the 70s, and people living about 10 to 13 years longer than they did in the 70s. So you've got this massive spread. And what we're finding is people in their 50s, like me, are in this what I call planet squeeze, which is typically where the aging parents are needing help and support and they're still around and the kids haven't left home. So you've got this like melting pot of costs and decisions and things that need to be planned and communicated that aren't naturally done. And the worst thing about that is, particularly with aging parents, if it gets away from you, that they haven't necessarily been involved in the decision making and you're left with the decision making responsibility. Now, if you're lucky enough, I say lucky enough to have siblings, my advice to people is to engage your siblings in a conversation early about your parents to work out how you can plan for their care and what responsibilities that you'd be prepared to take or you're not prepared to take and how to navigate those. And I think the key thing is engaging your siblings as best as possible. And setting up some personal boundaries as well, Tony. I think it's easy. It's enough having adult kids at home, but setting up some boundaries around what things you are prepared to do and perhaps what things you aren't. And again, this relies heavily on where we started today on communication. So get in early. This is another conversation that's really important to have actually, is just establishing what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. And look, I think at the other end of the spectrum on Planet Squeeze, around aging kids at home. Now, in Australia, we have a slightly different trend to the US because a lot of Australian kids go to university or college in their hometown. But more and more kids tend to be going away, which is good. But they're like boomerangs, they come back. And they can come back largely because it's just expensive to buy houses now. So people, as we've discussed, are staying at home longer. And so perhaps one of the things that you can do there is start to establish some type of board or rent that the kids pay. Just a little contribution towards the outgoings of the house that might be just a nice way. And you don't have to take that and spend it. You could save it up for them in time as well. But just to get them into the pattern, if you like, or the discipline of saving some money towards some outgoings that they're naturally going to have in life at some point anyway. So I think it only helps them learning about money and financial choices by putting some money aside to making a contribution to the house. That's one of the small boundaries I think you can put in place at a certain point. Like with us, we've decided things like mobile phone bills and cars, health insurance, they become your responsibility at different ages, but we sort of have tried to make a unilateral age for the cutoff of the parents' funding, if you like, of kids. So, but now I don't think, a lot of parents won't kick their kids out of home necessarily, but making sure that you have, again, open conversations about expectations with living cost. But yeah, it's quite obvious when you realize people living longer, getting married later, having kids later, all these things are coming together and really impacting people in our age group now. And it's a lot of pressure and stress, and it does need planning and communication as best as possible. Yeah.
So I think the last part of it is that this does fall disproportionately on women, and it's exacerbated by pay gaps and career disruption. Is what advice do you have for women to deal with all that? Because that's a whole toxic brew. They earn less money, they have the gaps, they have the expectations. How can women just sort of get ahead
Well,
or stay afloat?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Tony. I think you have to be selfish to some extent. So the advice I'd say or give people is, what decisions can you make for you? So what does this look like for you in 5 years from now or even 10 years from now? And so I talked a little bit before about boundaries, and it's similar, which is actually recognizing what you're prepared to do and what feels fair for you, but actually, again, communicating that choice. And whether that be to your spouse, to your kids, to your siblings, making sure people are aware of what you're prepared to do and what you're not. But being selfish also around what you need in your time, whether it be in your work, those types of things. And also just for your mental health. So you need some level of protection around yourself, and here's how you're going to go about it. But again, being open, I think, with that is of great value to family.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that it's necessarily being selfish. It's you have to take care of yourself. It's like put on your airbag first.
Yeah, that's right. 100%. Yeah, the oxygen mask for yourself. And I use the word selfish probably because it's the most cut through in terms of, and to be honest, it sometimes comes to giving people that energy around how they communicate, which is trying to be selfish, because family are very good at breaking down barriers on certain things and finding their way in, amazingly. So you have to kind of think, okay, how can I be more selfish about this? What's going to be the best thing for me? Because right here and now, it might seem like a great idea that you're taking mum and dad to all their medical appointments and those types of things. But there might come a point where actually, if you do that and you're not able to participate in the workforce in the way that you'd like, or you're running your own practice and it's just giving it no attention, that there'll be a cascading effect on your income down the track that might be a problem for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
keep you from your goals. So it's like it is a balancing act. And I think,
Yeah.
one of your suggestions is, and people don't do this, is to engage your siblings in these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to have I call it a family transition meeting,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
with your siblings and your parents about what does that all look like?
Yeah.
Who's supposed to do what? Like you said, who's the power of attorney?
That's
Um,
right. Yeah. And look, I went through, I mentioned my parents both passing away, and my sister and I, when my mum was really sick with cancer in hospital, we were talking to lots of specialists, and we were clashing a little bit with that. And I was speaking to an old school friend who had nursed her mum through a cancer journey at home, and I was contemplating that, all sorts of things. And she talked to me then about playing to my sister's strengths. Now, if this isn't the best advice I've ever received, but it was trying to work out what, and you know what your siblings' strengths are, play to them. So delegate to them in accordance with their strengths. And my sister was, I was the financial one, so she could do lots of other things, but I could talk to the doctors and do all the money stuff, and she could do lots of other things. If mum needed a pillow from home, she could go get that. There was lots of things that we could split up and not be clashing with each other. I mean, sometimes it's the opposite issue, which is nobody wants to jump in. But I do think that that delegation skill is valuable when it comes to siblings and parents aging and managing care. But again, let's communicate. Let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah, communication is the key. So,
Yeah,
Jackie, to wrap up, I have what I call the Get Ready Hot Take Trio. These
I
are
love
three
your
quick
trios.
questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. And these are questions I ask all of my guests. The
Yeah.
first one is, what's one money myth you're trying to break?
That more money will solve all your problems. Yeah, that's a myth.
I've heard that from so many people, is that more money
Yeah,
won't solve all
very.
of your problems. And, we can see that in the States, is like with athletes who go broke, they make millions of dollars and
Yeah.
then they're broke in a
Oh,
few years.
I
And
know. I
it's
know.
so that's a great myth. So let's get out the time machine. And you were starting to
Uh,
talk about this earlier, but this is a formal question now. Is if you could go
mm,
back in time, knowing what you know now about money, what advice
mm,
would you give your younger self?
yeah. Look, there's probably one point in my life where I could have done things differently. Like I'm pretty happy with most of it, no regrets. But when I was in a senior executive role earning really big bucks, I definitely, so when you've got a good income, it's coming in the door. I don't think I was as strategic with that income as I could have been. But we're playing at the edges now. Like I think I managed being in the property market, all those things well, but I could have been more strategic, and I was definitely a bit loose with it for a period of time where I probably could have done it differently. So I don't have any regrets about kind of the path I've been. I'm sure I could have chosen my first husband slightly better and not had to go through a divorce.
Yeah.
But hey, you live and you learn, right? I've learned from that experience. But yeah, I think if I was on that big fancy job, earning great cash, I could have done things a little bit differently with that. That might have set me up more, nicer than I have already. But yeah, maybe I just would have thought about that more at the time. When it's all going well, I should have questioned it as well.
Well, it's hard not to. And you're young, and when you're
Yes,
young, you feel slightly invulnerable, and
absolutely.
and that gets back to the importance of financial education for the young and helping them
Yeah.
get financially started. And
Yes.
it's hard. So it's
Yeah.
easy, to say, well, I mean, I had problems with debt when I was in my 20s, because I
Yeah.
thought credit cards were the best thing ever invented.
Oh yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yes,
So,
I've got a young adult in my house who thinks the same thing. And I'm like, what do you mean you're still paying off a credit card? Can't do that. Tear it up. I'm
uh,
like, freeze it, get rid of it.
it took me a little while, but I did pay
Yeah,
it off. But I
you
mean,
know.
it's the things we go through. Is we all
Yeah.
have things to learn. So, to close out, the final question is, what's your number one tip to change the way we think about money?
Well, money, so things happen for you, not to you, right? And I think with money comes responsibility and opportunity. And if you look at it that way, I think that is really positive. I think you can be optimistic about it. You can recover from your mistakes with money. You did like you did with your credit cards back in the day. There's always a way to recover from money mistakes. So I think being optimistic about it can be really empowering. And that's the way I choose to look at any form of money as a blessing, actually. And yeah, that's my hot tip, which is if you've got it, plan with it.
Yeah, I love that tip. And, I've heard, people who've listened to this podcast have heard stories from people who've started with nothing
Yeah,
and have been able to build very
yeah,
satisfactory lives, with
yes,
enough money. And that's the other big question that we've addressed on this show
yeah,
is, what is enough to you? Because as you
mm,
said, more money isn't the answer. Having
no,
enough is the answer to be
yeah.
satisfied.
Yeah,
So
actually, and I think one of the nice things about maybe things not always going our way in life is that resilience that you build through trial and error with money, for example, it can be one of the best things. I feel like when I went through my divorce, I was completely cleaned out, and I've rebuilt from that, but in a much stronger way than I would have continued life in my first marriage. So I think that builds resilience, obviously build my skills around dealing with anxiety, with money worries, and also prove to myself that I could make it back. So, yeah, you've got to back yourself, but things happen for you. They don't just happen to you. And, be optimistic. You can come back from money mistakes. And that's the most important thing people need to take away.
that is awesome. That's great advice and a great place to close the show. So, Jacqui, where can people learn more about you, your work, and pick up a copy of Stop Worrying About Money?
Oh, pretty easy to find, Tony. LinkedIn, Jacqui Clarke. I'm now writing on Substack under your personal CFO. So I write there weekly or fortnightly. You can buy my book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, pretty much anywhere I think you'll find. Maybe not in the bookstores now, but certainly online. And Instagram, Jacqui Clarke 000.
Cool. And for everybody watching and listening, as always, if you have access to the show notes, you can go to the show notes to find links to all those things that Jacqui mentioned. So, Jacqui, thanks for joining us on Get Ready Before Life Happens.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Glad to be your guest today.
Yeah, excited that you could join us. And thank you, everyone, as always, for tuning in to this episode of Get Ready Before Life Happens. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to subscribe and to share with a friend. You can also support this podcast at buymeacoffee.com/Tony Stewart, or you can go to my website at tonystewart.com to subscribe to my newsletter. Because when life happens, the way you think about money matters.